CBA you have.
All right.
You know, and they refused to wait. So in a sense, I think it was a big strategic mistake. I think if they had waited the 90 days they were given in October, they'd be in a much stronger position now to have the CBA they have registered and become a legal document.
Right. But then speaking of the state of healthcare, I think 2 days ago there was an article on one of the local dailies of a new rule now by the Ministry of Health and the KMPDU that no patient should be referred abroad for treatment, because many of these doctors refer patients abroad just to get the kickbacks. So the rule now is that no patient will be referred abroad until there is enough proof, I'm not sure by who and which body, that this patient actually needs to be taken abroad. And this is an bid to, they say, to improve the quality of healthcare in the country. Julie, do you think this is something that is long overdue, something that will make any difference?
Well, I think if you need to be referred abroad, then you need to be referred abroad, for one. And for two, politicians start, or let's call them leaders or people in positions of power and influence, start abroad, they don't even start here. So we're trying again to say that we have a health system that sucks. We have doctors who are on strike. We're not funding it enough. And then we're now saying that you can't even seek treatment abroad. I think it's kind of draconian. Of course, people can take advantage of the system. But when you think about the amount of health insurance that MPs, for example, have, which gives them so much leeway to get treatment almost anywhere in the world, it seems that you're punishing ordinary Kenyans for basically being poor. And I think that's very unfair.
Right. I mean, in fact, Latif, that same rule says, you, as a Kenyan, as the patient, you must also show proof that you can financially sustain yourself and whoever is going with you for that trip.
You know, we are talking about somebody who is actually sick, who needs medical attention at that point. We cannot sit here and say, you know, that there are no rogue doctors. There are rogue doctors in this country, and, you know, that is there. Just like in every profession, there must be some bad element here or there. But I don't think we should be therefore saying that, you know, now the way that we're going to solve this is by saying that you have to prove that you're sick, you have to prove that you can afford the medical care that you're going to get. I cannot prove that I can afford medical care at Kenyatta National Hospital. Should I be doing that before I make my way to Kenyatta National Hospital? You know, that I think that argument, we may need to interrogate it a bit further to understand exactly what are they saying, exactly where is this order coming from, and to what extent. Having said that as well, let's look at how do we raise issues and how do we address issues about doctors that, you know, are considered rogue. We've got the board, and the board, you know, we've seen even on social media people complain about Dr. X, and then that issue is taken to the board and the issue just sort of fizzles out. And, you know, the board comprises of doctors who sit and they look at their peers. And maybe that's what we should start with. If we're talking about rogue doctors, then let's look at the composition of this board. Let's look at how this board operates. Let's look at what the board has done to ensure that we retain professionalism and integrity in the medical profession. And then when you talk about now taking patients abroad for medical treatment, let's look at, do we have the same facilities here? If we're talking about someone is going for cancer treatment, for dialysis, for kidney transplant, nobody goes, well, a few people. Only a few people go for minor things like, you know, what we'd consider minor, for example, removing an elastoplast. Those are minor, those are few people. But most of the people that you hear that have gone to India to seek medical treatment
Actually need it.
They have actually needed it. And they take a lot of time fundraising locally to actually go. If you start now saying, first prove before you board this plane that you can afford it, now you're telling someone.
It's different. I mean, and you know, the argument was that if we have the same equipment in Kenya, then why are you taking these same people abroad? But even if the doctors strike, they're arguing that we have equipment that does not have the right personnel to man it. So, you know, it's a very difficult situation to deal with. But let's move away from that and focus on the IEBC now. Yesterday, the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission released a report showing that only 1.5 million Kenyans have so far registered as voters in the past 2 weeks. And that is way below target, because IEBC was targeting 1.4 million new registered voters every week. And, you know, that's rather low. And now they're raising concerns about voter apathy, which is a bit too late, if you ask me. But Julie, statistics now, how scary are they?
I think it's quite scary because 14 days into the exercise, meaning we have about 2 weeks left, They had an upper target of 6 million in total, a lower target of 4 million. They've done just about 25% of that. And if you look at how they've broken it down in the different regions, you can actually tell in which regions people are not coming out to register. And people keep on saying that this election will be decided on the registration process, when you can see which regions have actually come out and have the numbers in terms of people ready to vote. So the voter apathy perhaps could also be blamed on the fact that there's famine and drought in the country right now. 2 million people facing starvation. Of course, the doctors are almost 2 months into their strike. Nurses are threatening to go on strike. Lecturers have talked about strike. People are being laid off. The economy is not doing very well. So in this kind of situation, you're expecting people to go out and register to vote. But for what? What are you voting for? This government you've had for the past 4 or 5 years doesn't seem to have delivered, and then you're asking us now to go out again and vote. I think we need to be given a reason for that, basically. And when we're thinking about who we're voting in, what can they do better? So I'm not surprised by the voter apathy myself, because it seems that this election is coming at a time when we're disillusioned as a country, in leadership in general, not even the government and the opposition, just in the quality of our leaders. So I'm hopeful. We have 2 weeks to go. Yes, Kenyans, go out and get your voter's card. I mean, let's take part in our civic duty and responsibility, because it's important. But we must address all these other pressing issues that are actually affecting people on a personal and human level. Yes.
All right. And that being said, Latif, that's another catch-22 situation, especially for the Kenyan, because on one hand, there's all these things that are causing the voter apathy. But then on the other hand, if they do not vote, then nothing is going to change, and they're going to stay with the same regime or the same leadership for the next 5 years.
Probably because
which
they
way
voted
out?
and nothing has changed.
Which way out?
First, probably we should seek to understand how did IEBC come up with their target? What are they basing it on? And then look back and see what you're basing it on and what you're getting. What's the difference? What's not working? I think, first of all, the fact that there's a lot of talk and a lot of awareness and a lot of campaigns on the ground on voter registration is a good thing. There's this time round, there's a lot of awareness being created. So when you see that there's certain areas that have low numbers, then there must be other factors that are contributing to that. Not necessarily voter apathy, in terms of people are saying, I don't need to vote, I do not want to vote. But it's not on the top of their list for the day, So there are certain regions where you may find that, there are very many other factors that are affecting, that are causing this person not to go register as a voter. In other areas, for example, in the urban areas, we are talking about people who work in offices, maybe in private offices, and they haven't had time to go and register. And the only time that they probably have is a weekend or a Saturday, which, again, is also occupied. I see in the last 2 weeks, in the last push, you may be able to get a higher percentage, week on week of registered voters. I do not fully think that, IEBC's target of 6 million was their actual target. I think there's a public target, and then there must have been an internal target.
Right, I mean, because even in the first phase, the target was, 4 million, and they still didn't reach that. I think they only reached about half of that. Yeah, so I mean, are they likely, Gadara, to reach this target, this fake target, as Latif seems to call it?
I think it's obvious that they're not going to hit it. And I think it's, to an extent, it's a bit depressing. It's sad that people aren't either able or willing to go out and vote, and to go out and register to vote. And I do think that there's a sense in which we need to interrogate how the IEBC does this, as Latif has articulated. I think we need to look at whether people actually know where these stations are. I've been tweeting the IEBC and asking, where is my nearest station? Do I go to the school that's nearby? Schools are in session. Will you find IEBC guys there?
And interesting, on their website, they don't have any
precisely, there's no list of here are the stations, and it would be good to know that. When are they open? etc. They had spoken a bit about being proactive, going to where people are to register them, so they're talking about prisons and this. But people in markets, people at work, these are the places you should be going. If it takes 4 minutes, you can surely set up a a desk, at somebody's office and register the entire group of guys who are there if you wanted to. So it's more about being proactive, I think, for them. But I think even as we cover this, we've got to be aware of some of the roots that might be feeding the apathy. And I think in the end, for me, there has been a reduction of participation in the democratic process to simply the act of voting. And as we have seen over the last 20 years, voting by itself does not deliver change. There are systems to do with accountability that are constantly elided. So you're told vote today and then wait 5 years. But the stealing is happening throughout the 5 years. So all you do is you switch one bunch of thieves for another bunch of thieves and then you wait. So until we start examining how our democracy actually functions, whether it is actually accountable, or whether voting has simply become a ritual that we engage in every 5 years and then we all go back and forget about it. So that's why it's important when you think about the doctor strike that we spoke about, and how they don't pay doctors, but they can pay themselves, and we can't hold them accountable. We seem unable to be able to stop them doing this. If you think of what happened to the KDF contingent in Somalia and who we are able to hold account. I mean, there's an article yesterday in The Nation that says, essentially since 2011, since we went across, there has been not a single officer held to account for all the things that have gone wrong. So in what sense is this system accountable to us? And by simply voting, are you simply legitimizing the theft and the incompetence that's there, as opposed to actually changing it?
Right, and speaking of accountability, yesterday there was another news story of Teso South, a member of parliament, her name is Mary Emase, and she was allegedly caught in Uganda trying to influence Ugandans to register as Kenyan voters. And it was a very interesting situation because, of the border thing, so she was apparently seen in Uganda, but when she saw police officers, she crossed over to the Kenyan side. But her bodyguard was not that fast, so he was arrested.
First, we should be worried that the MP is faster than the bodyguard.
The bodyguard was armed.
But also, I think, Jubilee almost never misses a situation to look really bad. They had been on, abusing Raila about his allegations that they were registering Ethiopians, Ugandans, and now here is one of the MPs.
Right, and exactly. So that's the question. I mean, they've rubbished Raila's claims of the NIS and registering foreign voters, and then here it is. Of course, this member of parliament has rubbished this as propaganda, but Ugandan police say they got information of this woman campaigning in Uganda.
Right.
I mean,
and
Julie,
they've got somebody in custody.
Does this put more water on the claims by the opposition?
I think it definitely does. And I think when you take Graft International, surely there's right. But it's funny that, because Raila did say that, and people, of course, rubbished his claims and said that that is so far-fetched, how can you even imagine that? Right. And then she gets caught. So I really don't know what to say about this.
Well, although we should actually learn, Raila spoke of Eurobond.
Yes.
Rubbish turned out. Spoke of NYS.
Yes.
Rubbish turned out to be true.
Yes.
Now he spoke of registering foreign voters. Rubbish. Turns out there's an MP doing it.
Right. Moral of the story, perhaps you should listen to Raila when he speaks.
More importantly, I think, is she doesn't register voters. She's going to recruit people, apparently, to register as Kenyan voters. Now, the question should be, has this been happening?
That's it.
And to look at actually at the IBC and then ask who actually does the registration, and to inquire about the validity of the register, if indeed you've gotten people coming across from other countries and being registered as Kenyans.
Right, Eric.
The issue here for me is not really, like I say, Raila saying something does not necessarily mean that it's because Raila has discovered something. Raila has access to information. So when he says it, it's probably true. But it also, it's, I think to me, an MP who's in a border constituency crossing over the other side to import voters is the same as an MP in Embakasi crossing over to the neighboring constituency to import voters. Voter importation happens across the country. It's happening right now across the country. Go to any constituency and you'll hear people telling you that, there are people who've been brought in trucks to come and register here as voters. And there are others who you've even seen leaders talking on TV and saying, remember, please, go and register where you are likely to vote. And the other issue that they're raising is, so if you've brought in your guys to come and register here as voters, and then you lose at the nomination stage, those people, you're not going to bring them to come and vote on voting day. So what does that do? What happens to those votes? That's the question being raised. So I think for me, the MP crossing over to Uganda is neighboring constituency for her.
Right.
It's the next place that she can get people. And she went there to get people. It should be tackled, of course.
And of course, across the border in Busia, there are Tesos and Luyas, Samias. So I guess
and some of these people maybe don't even, yes, they're coming now to pick up their IDs. They have registered. They've always operated this way. I do not think this is unique. I don't think it's the first time that somebody has crossed over, to a neighboring constituency or to a neighboring country to import a voter. And I don't think it will be the last if nothing is done. And the thing that should be done is, let's not look at it as, Raila said, therefore Jubilee is culpable because this is a Jubilee MP. This is an MP for Teso who crossed over and did what she did. Has it happened before? What can IEBC do to retain the integrity of the electoral process?
Yeah, and also I think look at the election rules and the Election Act. I'm sure going across an international border to import guys to come and register as Kenyans is illegal, and I think if the IEBC was actually enforcing the Elections Act that it's supposed to do, lots of these people would not be able to stand in the coming election, that their candidacy would be erased. But because the IEBC doesn't take a stand on this, I mean, they should be calling for investigation, they should be liaising with police, and seeing this as a serious issue that it is.
Right.
The other problem with voter transportation is how it distorts the fundamentals on the ground. So if you've got a safe seat somewhere, you think, well, let me take now a bunch of those guys and go register them somewhere. That is an abuse of the process, and I think that's where, again, IEBC needs to come down and innate regulations and in enforcing the Elections Act, come down on these guys and actually punish them, not simply sit back as if it's helpless.
And I mean, it's interesting to see whether this will go anywhere, but also a lot of politics is likely to play out because of this story. Because remember when Raila Odinga brought up the allegations, the rebuttal by CS Joseph and Kaiseri was also very shocking for Kenyans. Like, he's here saying this, why doesn't he bring proof? And here is something for Raila Odinga to begin with, although I'm sure he does have a bit more. But let's focus now on more politics. And yesterday we had opposition leaders with the National Super Alliance name a 12-member committee that will be steering the way forward in picking the joint opposition candidate. But even before that, there's been a lot of speculation on the pairings. Should it be Raila Odinga and Kalonzo Musyoka again, or is Mudavadi likely to be the better candidate for the opposition? I mean, Julie, how do you see this politics playing out?
Well, at Bomas, Kalonzo more or less said he's willing to sacrifice his ambitions.
He had a very strong bat at the end of that stage.
He had a bat, but he did start off by saying he can sacrifice, and then Wetangula said that as well a few days ago. So I think we can assume that the pair will be the remaining two. I shall not name them just in case I'm wrong, but I think united oppositions can win elections. I think back in 2002 it was, I think the Rainbow Coalition came in very strongly because they all came together in one basket. And I think this time around, if NASA can manage to hold together, if the center can hold until August the 8th, then I think they do have a fair chance of challenging the incumbent. But let's see how it plays out, because in politics, a day is like 1,000 years, 1,000 years is like a day. Anything can happen. A week in politics can change the entire landscape of how people thought things were going to go. So let's watch them and see. It's good that they're trying to show some kind of unity and put systems in place, at least to choose their flag bearer, because I think people now need to know who.
Yeah, I mean, we've been talking about this flag bearer for the longest time.
For the longest time, and people need some kind of certainty, even as people are registering to vote. So I think it's a good move for the opposition.
All right. And Latif, before we come to you, let's listen into opposition leaders speaking about their quest for unity.
This is a time for Wiper to take leadership. Ndugu zetu wa ODM tuliwajaribia, wajaribu Wiper sasa, muone vile itakuwa.
Niko tayari na ninaenda kuwa president, lakini itategemea nguvu zetu. Na nguvu zetu ni kura.
Tengana, mimi niende kivyangu, Raila aende kivyake.
Mtu ambaye anaweza kuangusha Uhuru Kenyatta asubuhi saa 2 ni Raila Amolo Odinga pekee.
All right, and a lot of optimism there from the opposition with regard to their flag bearer for the August 8th election. And let's continue to speak to our panelists. And Latif, like Julie said, I mean, one day in politics can change absolutely everything. And all these four politicians now, all of them, of course, want to be flag bearer. Yeah. Is this bid for unity likely to stick? Or like Julie says, along the way, people are going to find their avenues out?
I think it depends very much on what they agree on, internally. So if I'm not on the ticket, what am I getting out of it? And to me, that's a bigger problem, because we seem to be focusing on voting out leaders from all levels. It's just vote out the leader, not who we are bringing in and what they stand for and what they're going to deliver. So these guys are going to form that committee, and that committee will put together, they'll not put a bullet train on their manifesto and tell us that they're bringing a train, but they'll put up something similar and say, together we're going to achieve this. And internally they'll be saying, so you two will be on the ticket, and then the rest of us, we sign an MOU, or we have this gentleman's agreement, or whatever kind of agreement, that this is what we get. It is about them. It's about what they are going to get.
The MOUs are
not necessarily what they're going to do. They don't agree. They have not been agreeing on how they need to run the country. They've been agreeing on, yes, we need to get into that.
Make sure all of us,
I mean,
we need to get into office.
The talk of increasing the number of constitutional positions, prime ministers, deputy prime ministers, etc., to accommodate all of this. As Latif is very right, this is all a discussion of what do the politicians get. And I think it goes to the heart of what I've been saying about how our politics works, and even how we report our politics. We deal with politicians' problems as if they are Kenyans' problems. And in fact, to a very large extent, we ignore Kenyans' problems and focus on those of politicians. These discussions that they are having about a unified candidate, where's the unified vision to accompany it? What are the debates they're having about policy, if there are any? To my mind, I don't see anything that they're sitting to discuss. This is how Raila would have done something different, and this is what Mudavadi would have done differently. And then they are having a debate about that and coming up with a unified vision. It is not. It is all about what positions will they get. And then they try and socialize this. So you have them saying, oh, Mluya akipata presidency, all Luyas have gained. How have all Luyas gained? It's only one guy who's gotten the job, And that, for me, is a form of corruption. It's something that really distorts our system. And I think our media gets sort of eroded into this, because our media has essentially abdicated its role of setting agendas for the public and left it to the politicians. And so we are constantly talking about what they get out of this, and then portraying it as if it is communities winning. But it is not. These are individuals fighting for individual positions. Their salary is not going to be shared out with their constituents or their tribesmen.
It's true, but don't you think they should get their house in order first before they tell us what they will do for us? They need to be organized as
but
whatever
what do you mean by being
they are.
organized?
Exactly.
We need to know exactly how they're going to organize their government, and then they can tell us what they're going to do for us based on that organization, I believe.
Their organization of government, however, as they have started showing, is about who sits where.
Right, and we had that. We had that. It was two deputy presidents.
But the point is, form should follow function.
Exactly.
So you don't start by saying, let me form a government and then figure out what I'm going to do with it. You decide what you want to do, and then you form the government to actually achieve
when Julie
that.
mentioned, even those with the voter apathy and whatnot, they might want to go out and vote, but even if they vote for a new administration, what new issues are they bringing to the table? Right. But I feel like we've, our leaders should know what Kenyans expect of them, but Kenyans also seem to have forgotten what they expect of their leaders. What are we expecting from NASA, for example?
Personally, I'm not expecting anything or from any government that comes into any government of Kenya, because over the years we've seen that they haven't really delivered on their promises. So right now I think the opposition is banking their main agenda and their policy is just to unseat the government. They don't really have any plan for Kenyans. They might have a very fancy gold-plated image vision 2055, but the thing is are they going to implement it? Because as I say,
do they intend to?
Do they intend to do that? Do they have the political will, or are they just, like Gadara says, handing out?
I think to an extent we're asking the wrong question. It's not so much are they intend to, but my question is, how can we hold them accountable if they don't? How can we ensure that in the 5 years in between elections, you know, how do we ensure that they are actually implementing the things that they promise? And what recourse do we have when they don't?
I think we don't. We're almost
That's
powerless.
the thing, is if that's the case, then we should be sitting and asking why, because that is not how our democracy is meant to
because
work.
Kenyans should be the drivers of change.
Precisely, so that we should be able to, at any point, and I'll give you an example. We've got in our constitution a guarantee that you can recall an MP.
Right.
But in the law that they passed, the very MPs that passed for that, they made it impossible for you to do so.
Right.
So at one hand, we've got something that looks and feels like a democracy. But when you actually interrogate it, it is nothing of the sort. It erases the very people it is supposed to represent. And I think for all of us, this is, and as media, we need to start looking at the substance of things, not the form of it. And I think if you look across the board, look at the discussions we had about the IEBC and the electoral versus manual system. It's all about forms, not about substance. We've got an electoral system that since 1992, in about 5 elections, has only once delivered votes, the presidency, to the guy with the most votes.
Right.
Only once.
But Kadara, we always talk about institutions, and we always say it's a catch-22 again, because when the people fail, we blame the institutions. When the institutions fail, we blame the people. So form and substance, I think, have to go together.
I think, actually, no. When we talk of institutions, I think we kind of misunderstand what institutions are. Institutions aren't bodies. We think IBC.
It's structure.
No, institutions are ways of doing things. And what we should be asking is whether our system that we've set up, the bodies and whatever, whether in their interactions they actually deliver the ways of doing things that are envisaged, for example, in the Constitution. And in very many senses, whether it's about independence of commissions, independence of the police, free, fair elections, all these promises given in the Constitution, all this vision in the Constitution, the system that is set up does not deliver them. In fact, it acts in ways
about the independence of independent commissions.
So we don't have institutions and ways of doing things, that are what our Constitution, for example,
But what then is the solution to that, Gadara?
Well, the solution to that, I think, for us is to first acknowledge where the problem lies. And I think the problem lies in the system itself. In how it is structured, in how the various interactions between the various players there, and the behavior it incentivizes. And then we need to have a discourse about how we change that. Now, that discourse is not going to be brought forward by the politicians who gain from this. It's got to be driven by factors, by agencies that are outside of the state. And that has to be by civil society and the media. And unfortunately, we're in a situation where both these two have kind of taken a seat back and are waiting for the politicians to tell them what the issues are.
They've been infiltrated. The way forward, like Gadara is saying, and I want to support that, it's for the people of Kenya to actually internalize what government is, what systems are, what is wrong, what should work, and how it should work. And the moment that every part of this system is about the electorate, is about the population, that is when we're going to change things. Look at what we were doing with the IEBC, and just brought it up, and I kept saying, when politicians are the ones who are spearheading, change and removal of officers at the IEBC, and when they're the ones who are spearheading talk about electoral reforms, we are basically turning this thing around and saying that elections, the biggest stakeholder in an election is the candidate, and it should not be. The biggest stakeholder in an election is the voter, because the voter is the one who's there making a decision, saying this is how I want, this is who I want to lead me, because they have convinced me and I agree with how they want to do their things. But when we're having politicians, everything, it's now politicians saying should we have elections in August, it's politicians saying should we have a new electoral body, it's politicians saying should we have this kind of system. That should not be the case. And the moment we start having elements of the population having that conversation, which shall be either civil society or, you know, community-based discussions led by the media or being, you know, highlighted by the media. That's when we start having a good conversation. Therefore, the media has a central role to play in this. The media should set the agenda. The media should sit back and say, this is the story as it is, not what has been said by leader A or B or C.
All right. And I mean, even as we leave that conversation, the issue of accountability is one that plays out even more, because when the electoral laws, the very controversial electoral laws were being passed, for example, it was very controversial. There were no opposition members. The media was there outside. Of course, the media had been barricaded to a certain position. And, you know, the talk was even the media seemed helpless with the situation, even with their reporting.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think there's a sense in which once we put people in power, they are no longer accountable. I think that is a central thing we need to talk about. And as media, and I think in civil society as well, churches included in this, we need to have a conversation about how Kenya actually works, and then to figure out how we can take it from there to what we envisage, what should be the ideal, the Kenya we want, you know, and let's actually talk about that and not assume that simply because we've got a guarantee in the Constitution, it will somehow magically happen or translate into how we are governed.
All right. Let's move away from this and focus on another big story this week, and that is the AUC chair elections, where Foreign Affairs CS Amina Mohamed was one of the 5 contenders. And the election brought out a lot of things. I mean, there was Kenya's lukewarm relations with the Western countries, and the controversial ICC factor, and then outright betrayal by our neighboring countries that seems to have taken everybody by storm. But I mean, Julie, let's begin with you. A lot of women, first of all, are very proud of Amina Mohamed for going that far. What are your thoughts for her being fronted, first of all, as a Kenyan candidate?
Well, I think she has the qualifications. She's worked at the highest levels, almost the highest level at the UN. She's been Kenya's representative to the UN in Geneva. She's done stuff with the WTO. She's a career diplomat. She's got the qualifications. I think the problem might have been something to do with the way she was fronted. It sounded like it was a protest vote, first of all, from our neighbors. Perhaps some of them didn't want to withdraw from the ICC or felt that Kenya was being the playground bully. It sounded like it was a we'll show you. You know, you're not like the kingpin around here. And also for the fact that the whole Francophone, Anglophone angle that Amina brought out, but also personality-wise, Kenya as a country and Amina as a person, the way we carried out this campaign was very robust and very aggressive. And I think that might have put some people off. It's hard to say exactly what went wrong. There were many different factors, with Morocco wanting to get back into the AU, the issue of the Western Sahara, the issue of the SADC. There were many factors happening when this vote happened. But at the end of the day, I really truly believe it was a protest vote against Kenya. For many different reasons. One of them might have been the ICC. And many people in the international press were reporting that people felt that Amina was perhaps too loyal to her country and her president. Therefore, her vision for Africa might have been make Kenya great again, which would have not worked for the rest of the African states. So many different factors playing out here, but I think Kenya needs to learn lessons and figure out how to rule the continent, how to actually launch an actual charm offensive, because I think we sounded belligerent, perhaps, and entitled when we should have been politely campaigning for people's votes.
Right. I mean, Latif, what went wrong? And I mean, what are we talking about in terms of relationships with the neighboring countries, Burundi, Rwanda, Uganda, and Djibouti, rather?
I think the first thing is it was a moment of pride that, you know, Kenya fronted a candidate. And I disagree with very many people who are saying, you know, we have doctors, we're on strike, we've got famine, we've got, you know, what are we doing going to Africa? It does not mean that because I have not bought uniform for my child, I cannot, you know, go out there and become the chairman of the estate committee. It's a sense of pride, you know, at every opportunity that we get for Kenyans for Kenya to have a position globally, we should take it. Maybe it will help our cause also locally. Now, looking at the vote and how the vote went, there's a lot of speculation, and, you know, it's part of what Julie's saying. There's a lot of speculation of what could have happened, what could have gone wrong, what might not have worked. I sense of sort of disagree a bit in terms of how is Kenya's position in Africa. Before this, Kenya was able to, push through very many of its ideas across Africa. I think Kenya was at some point, positioning itself very well as, Kenya is a spokesman for Africa, a spokesperson for us. Kenya is Africa. Kenya is a Pan-African African. And getting now to this vote and seeing all these other things play out, probably even the fellow East Africans felt that we stabbed them in the back when the first vote didn't go through. Remember, there was an initial vote where there were other regional candidates and they did not go through. We had to call a second vote. Probably they were saying, all right, so the last time you guys did not campaign for us. We had a candidate in the last election. You did not campaign for us, so why should we turn around and see like your candidate is better? Why didn't you stick it out with us and
It's
push us
interesting
through?
that those candidates in Rwanda actually that were initially denied are the same candidates that also took part in this other election. So the question is, what has changed in terms of qualifications? And
well, I mean, nothing has changed. I mean, this is all about regional alliances and a national pride to an extent amongst the various countries that are fronting candidates. But I think we have to be a bit careful when we talk about Kenyan candidates. Amina was very much a candidate of the state, not necessarily the candidate of Kenyans. And I think in how she has comported herself, yes, she's got an impressive CV, but how she has comported herself as foreign minister has been, I think, nothing short of atrocious. Especially when it comes to the ICC issue. I think she was a huge embarrassment for us on that. Very effective.
Not for the government.
Kenyatta.
Effective for the government, but
very
not for the
effective,
people.
yeah. But for us, for the regular Joe, I think it was quite unfortunate how she went about it. I think also there's a sense in which we don't understand, or we don't have an appreciation of the history of Kenya's relationship with Africa, the rest of Africa. Don't forget, I mean, we have not viewed very much as Pan-Africanists. By then, we scuttled the EACC, the EAC, its first version, took off with all their planes and stuff. We forget that we used to cooperate with the apartheid regime in South Africa. In fact, even now, when you see Kenyatta going to push for Israel to be taken in as part of, as an observer at the AU, which the reason they had been stopped from the AU was the oppression of the Palestinians, which has been a solid plank of African policy. We've gone against all of these things, and in very many corners of Africa, we're not seeing as a proper African country. If you read, there's an article that Charles Obo wrote in 2013, when the whole ICC thing was blowing up, and he was talking about how the ICC has done what diplomats and Pan-Africanists have failed, and that's make Kenya a proper African state. But there is that legacy, of how we are viewed, and I think to a lot of people, we were sort of riding roughshod over that history. And also in the way, as Julie said, in the way we went sort of kifua mbele, to push Amina there, and stuff. I think we also created quite a lot of, I think these are just Johnny come lately, in this. And here they are trying to sort of take it over.
I think you're right, actually, because Burundi and Djibouti said they had their own candidates for deputy chairpersons. Right. They didn't even care.
For me, there's a moment of pride, and the issue of nationalism. For me, there's a moment of pride in terms of that's who we are as Kenyans. Crossover to Tanzania as Gadara, not as a government representative of Kenya, but as Gadara, and you'll be told as Gadara, nyinyi wa Kenya bana. That's how we come across. That's who we are. That's how we are. Now, we take that, and we almost got away with it. We almost got it. Right. We actually almost got away and took over the leadership of the AU Commission after maybe having played a part in making sure that the first vote didn't go through, after maybe playing a role in something. Right. This is Kenya,
It's
is
kinda-
Kenya asserting itself
But
now?
I think
The
the-
method,
the
the
betrayal should tell us something.
methodology
Yeah,
of
I mean,
how we do it.
Let's hear from Gadara before we speak
Yeah,
to
it
Julie.
should tell us something. And the fact is how we are viewed across the continent. It's not the way we view ourselves.
Right.
You know, and that is a mirror being put up to us. And if you look at the agendas that we have pushed at the AU, I mean, that the largest of which has been the withdrawal from ICC, it has been resoundingly rejected, you know,
And
across.
extremely selfish on our part.
You know,
isn't it?
precisely, and it was seen for what it was. It was a selfish move by Kenya to try and make a Kenyan problem. In
An
fact,
African
a problem for everybody
It's not even a
else.
Kenyan
It's not even a Kenyan
problem, if you
problem.
think
It's a
about it.
private, what do you
It's
call it?
private
A
citizens'
personal
problem.
challenge?
Yes, it was a personal challenge, as I described it before.
Right. You know, so that personal challenge becomes a problem for everybody on the continent, everybody in the world. You know, and that was seen for what it was. You know, it's selfishness on the part of our own government. And I think this has been sort of their comeuppance that they're getting, you know, that you can't just assume
do
to
that.
dictate to everybody. You know.
All right. I mean, just before we wind up,
We almost
Julie,
got it.
what does this mean for, I mean, the strength of the ESC? Because beginning of the year, everybody was throwing praises at ECOWAS for the way they handled the Gambia situation, a very bloodless transition. And then, you know, even East Africans are like, you know, ECOWAS is one of the strongest regional bodies. But when you ask them about their own regional body, the ESC, I mean, there's just a lot of friction going on.
I think that EAC unity is almost a joke at this point in time, because Tanzania has been blocking the integration almost at every fork in the road. Uganda now betrayed us with this vote. We clearly saw that. If you compare us to ECOWAS seems like a sound, unified, speaking in one voice body. The EAC is still trying to find a common purpose, still trying to get over Kenyans and our national pride and whatever else. We still haven't come together as a cogent, cohesive unit, which we need to do if we're going to move ahead. Because in this particular situation, the AU, if the EACC was one voting bloc, it would have made a world of difference. But it's clear that we were not. So like Gadara says, it's a mirror that's been put up to Kenya, for example, in how we communicate the rest of the continent, how we put our point across. We need to take in the vision of our region and the continent and not just put our own interests ahead of everybody else's. So that's what I would say about
All right.
that.
And Gadara,
Well, I
just...
think on the EAC thing, I'll make 2 quick points. First, the EAC was seen, at least up to about 5-6 years ago, I think, as one of the fastest integrating regions, not just in Africa, but across the world.
Right.
You know, so we should be careful not to just throw it away that way, you know. It does have things that are working for it. You know, it concluded agreements. The biggest problem is we don't implement them. So we've got a customs union, we've got a common market, but we still have borders, you know, you still need whatever passport or you need to get across borders and things like that. You know, things that should have been erased. You can't just go to TZ and apply for a job you know, if you're a Kenyan, things like that. So those need to be changed. But I think more importantly, for Kenya at least, we need to see what happened at the AU, you know, as a microcosm, not really a microcosm, what it's happening on a wider stage, but it's the same thing that's been happening locally within the EAC when we try and sign our SGR agreements and we want to build a pipeline and everybody's running away from us. That should tell us something, you know, that there's a problem here
Somewhere,
about how we
right?
deal with our neighbors, how we are perceived by our neighbors.
Is
we
it
are
the
not
way
the
we
most
perceive
reliable
ourselves?
of people.
And the irony
you know,
is
stuff.
Kenya seems to have signed all these various agreements, the tax, the customs union, for the EAC, but the other countries seem to be blocking things.
Right, yeah.
So-
You know, so there's a sense also where, I mean, there's a fear, if you will, which is born by the history. If you look at the first articulation of the EAC, and now, I mean, the Tanzanians do have legitimate fears about Kenyans coming in, taking over. As I said, from the first EAC, we took off with their planes.
So obviously a lot of issues that need to be tackled with the ESC. But let's move on from that just a moment as we focus on the KDF attack that happened earlier on Friday. And as I understand our time is up, but Latif, maybe you could give your comments very fast, because Gadara brought up the issue of accountability. Nobody has been taken into account for what happened, despite the fact that this attack happened almost the same way with the Elade attack, and lessons should have been learned by then.
It's true. Nobody has, to the public knowledge, faced any kind of action to the public knowledge. Maybe something has happened internally. But the thing is also it's a military operation. Of course, I cannot sit and believe that our military top brass or across our structure of the military is completely naive and doesn't know how to first conduct an operation, to defend its camps, 3, gather its intelligence. Remember, our head of intelligence countrywide is a former man who was heading intelligence at the military operation in Somalia. I do not think it's incompetence. I think there are many questions in my head, but I refuse to believe that our military is incapable.
Maybe
That our military is not able to handle.
That is the final word, Gadara. Unfortunately, we're out of time and we have to wrap up. And we've been speaking to journalists Julie Masiga, Eric Latif, and cartoonist Patrick Gadara here on Newsroom Chat. And that brings us to a break here on Morning Express. For those on our KTN Home channel, Life and Style comes up next. For those on KTN News, our top stories this hour are coming up right after the break. And of course, later on, we're focusing on your health. We'll have an expert in studio to speak about hypothyroidism and just what it is. Do keep us engaged on Twitter, especially for your health conversation. We take a short break here. We'll be back shortly.